Alright, let's talk about a player who definitely has taken a lot of criticism since entering the league. The guy who is known for getting selected in front of Justin Jefferson, plays the same position as Justin Jefferson, has not been quite as good as Justin Jefferson. In fact, is currently, not on the team that he was drafted for, the Philadelphia Eagles. But obviously, the Eagles do tend to know what they're doing. They do tend to make smart decisions. So why did they miss this one so badly? Why did Jalen Reager fail to meet his expectations? Well, let's get into it. So first, let's look at this is his PFF Draft Profile. You see his grades along with some other stats from the most previous 3 seasons that he was in college. So he was, drafted after the 2019 season. And you see PFF was not a huge fan of him coming out of college. In fact, out of the 3 years he played, he only had 1 year where he had a grade above 70 and no years where he had a grade above 80. That usually doesn't get you drafted, to be honest. Although, again, it is worth noting that PFF grades for wide receivers are not as important to look at as PFF grades for other positions. So right off the bat, a bit of a surprise that was as low as it was, but I wanted to get some more evaluations of how people felt about him coming out of college before I went back and watched some of his college tape myself. And first thing, one thing I often do on these types of videos is go back and look at my own evaluations of these players. Unfortunately, I did not evaluate Jalen Reager that season. That's back when I did have a YouTube channel, but wasn't really as into the draft stuff as I am now. But this is what Walter Football had to say. If you haven't seen Walter Football, it's a great site to go back and look at some, evaluations of tons of NFL prospects and to have a pretty long database going back several years. So I'm going to borrow from what they had to say. And there's a good list of strengths right here. You see the speed is a lot of them that use, here, a lot of quick release off the line, things like that. The first step and the speed are really what people noted about him most of all. If you look at the one all the way at the bottom, it says potential to be one of the most potent speed receivers in the NFL. So it was not just the Eagles that thought Reager could be very good. A lot of people thought Jalen Reager could be good. Now, it is worth mentioning that the consensus was not that Jalen Reager should have been drafted over Justin Jefferson. Jefferson was 18th on the consensus big board, which was the 4th highest graded receiver on the consensus big board, whereas Jalen Reager was 42nd on the consensus big board. That puts him as the 9th highest graded receiver on the consensus big board. So definitely, it was a bit of a surprise when he got drafted anyway, but there were people who liked Reager. Again, for his weaknesses, some that wouldn't really be that concerning. I think like shorter than ideal. I don't think that's the reason why he hasn't yet been successful at the NFL level. But things like needs a lot of coaching on route running is one. Can have minor bouts of drops, not a big catch radius, and not a receiver to win 50-50 passes. Okay, those are some issues, but even those doesn't feel like they're disasters necessarily. Maybe reasons why you wouldn't love to draft him over a Justin Jefferson, but not necessarily reasons why you expect him to not work at the NFL level. So going over to some tape, I went and watched some highlight videos of him, and I was actually surprised with the highlight videos of how unimpressive a lot of them were. Like, for example, this is just going to be a screen pass. You see that the ball gets over to Jalen Reager, and again, this is a highlight reel. This isn't just a play of his that I randomly picked out from a game. These are highlights that, people picked out as his best plays. And you see when he goes, it's a solid play. It's not a bad one necessarily, but his highlights were filled with plays like this that were just kind of like solid plays, which already was kind of a red flag of if this is what the people that like about you, it's not overly impressive necessarily. Or even stuff like this, which is going to be, it's a one-on-one matchup on the outside, kind of this wide receiver fade route situation. And, one of the things that was talked about was he doesn't have the best catch radius. However, a lot of his big wins were stuff like this. You see that when the ball is snapped and thrown over in his direction, he goes up and is able to make the grab. That's not something that was necessarily considered a strength, and yet that was a lot of what people that liked about him was that he would go up and do stuff like that. So despite it not really being a massive benefit, in his game, people still considered it one, and I'm assuming the Eagles still considered it one, which is why they drafted him. And also, I should mention, a lot of his highlights were in special teams, a lot of punt return and kick return type stuff, which was surprising to me as well, because again, how much does that translate to the NFL? Usually you just draft a guy in like round 7 to be your kick returner or punt returner. You don't, you try to get a number 1 wide receiver to do that, and in fact, if your number 1 wide receiver is good, typically you won't even have them returning punts. So that's definitely another weird surprise. That was also a benefit on the Walter Football page. Listen, it's a nice little addition, but you don't draft a guy because of that. And then some of the wins were stuff like this, so it's going to be a one-on-one matchup on the outside. Watch how right when this play begins, you see the quarterback is going to make the throw in this direction. And listen, this is one of those plays where it's like, how do you know if this is going to work at the NFL level? Because Reager did run by the corner, so the corner cannot look towards the football, and Reager can. So when Reager is able to adjust to the football, the corner couldn't see where the ball was, Reager could, and that's how he's able to get the touchdown right there. On one hand, that's undeniably a very good play from Jalen Reager. It's hard to argue the contrary. That is objectively a good play. The question is, would that work at the NFL level? We know now that the answer is no, but there have been plenty of players who primarily get wins this way at the college level, and then at the NFL level, when they play faster corners, are still able to get wins in other ways, which is why it's so hard to draft receivers. It's so hard to project how good they're going to be, and why people miss on receivers in the draft so frequently, because if this did work at the NFL level, there's a chance that Reager could be a really good receiver right now, although still probably was never going to be better than Jefferson, because, again, knowing what we know now, Jefferson was massively slept on in the draft. Like, even something like this is another good example, I would say, where, again, it's going to be a deep route for Reager. Watch how when this play begins. It's a one-on-one matchup on the outside, and for Reager, I mean, once the camera gets over there and we see where he's at, he is completely wide open. I mean, this just doesn't happen at the NFL level. You don't get this far open because you play against better corners, and I think that's kind of maybe part of the issue with Reager. As you see right here, he does end up getting into the end zone for a touchdown. Very good play from Reager, but again, you have to be able to do other stuff. If you primarily win using speed on the outside, at the NFL level, corners are good enough that you're going to have other tools in your toolbox, and so far Reager just has not had any, which is why he's no longer a Philadelphia Eagle. So why did Jalen Reager become a bust? Well, that is the reason, in my opinion, and that is a big issue and part of why he, hasn't been successful. Is there a way he could turn it around still at this point in his career? Sure, why not? But what have we learned from all of this, in my opinion? Not a ton. Again, we know it's really hard to evaluate receivers, but maybe just make sure that you are paying attention to, what you're good with. Make sure you're not putting too much value on someone being good at special teams if you're drafting them in round 1. Things like that. Make sure that you're not, overvaluing just one trait would probably be a good idea. But again, there have been guys who are just a one-trick pony, but in the NFL level, then when they have to develop other tricks, they do and become successful. So the main thing we've learned from this, in my opinion, is it's really hard to evaluate wide receivers, in my opinion. But yeah, we already kind of knew that. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.